The amendment was for $9 billion, and it was missing. In the silent, 42nd floor dining room of a tower overlooking the East River, that was the only fact that mattered. Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil sat perfectly still, a man whose stillness could curdle markets. Across the polished mahogany, Henderson, his American rival, wore a smirk that was an invoice for this exact humiliation. Khalid's advisors shuffled papers with the quiet panic of men who knew their careers were evaporating. Physically present, but socially invisible, was Alara Evans. At 18, she moved through the world of the powerful with the practiced anonymity of a waitress. Her job was to refill water glasses, to be a ghost in a black uniform. While Titans postured, she was doing her job. She noticed things. She noticed the slight indentation in the plush carpet near the junior associate's chair. She noticed the corner of a white paper, crumpled as if in a fist and then discarded, peeking out from beneath the heavy velvet curtain. She recognized the law firm's letterhead from across the room. As one of Khalid's men began a sweating apology, Alara moved. No one saw her approach. She bent in a single, fluid motion, retrieving the paper. She did not look at it, did not draw attention. She simply straightened it with her thumb and forefinger and, as she passed Khalid's chief of staff, discreetly placed the folded document on the corner of his leather portfolio. But Henderson saw. His voice, slick with triumph, cut through the tension. "Having the help fetch your paperwork now, Khalid? Be careful. This one requires literacy." The insult was aimed at him, but Khalid deflected it with the casual cruelty of a cornered king. He flicked his gaze toward Alara, dismissing her entirely. "She only needs to know the difference between still and sparkling," he said, his voice cold and clipped. "Let's not ask too much of her." The room froze. Alara felt a dozen pairs of eyes land on her. She was supposed to blush, to stammer, to disappear. Instead, she stood a little straighter. She turned her head, not to Sheikh Khalid, but to Henderson. In perfect, formal French, she said, "Sir, the addendum regarding the water rights in Section 5 was clearly misplaced, not discarded." Then, turning to the German investor at the end of the table, she added in flawless German, "Perhaps a moment to review, it would be beneficial for all parties." To the Spanish legal counsel, she shifted again, her voice acquiring a different cadence in Spanish. "The third clause seems most pertinent." To the silent Japanese tech partner, she bowed her head slightly, speaking in concise, polite Japanese. "Your concerns about intellectual property are addressed on the second page." Finally, she turned back to Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil. Her expression was neutral, her posture impeccable. In calm, clear English, she asked, "Would you like me to pour the water now, sir?" In that moment, Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil did not see a waitress. He saw the most elegant weapon he had ever encountered, and he had absolutely no idea how to disarm it. By the next morning, the deal was signed. The missing addendum had been Henderson's last, desperate gambit, and a waitress had dismantled it in 5 languages. Khalid's chief of staff, a perpetually weary man named Omar, was dispatched not to a rival corporation, but to the manager's office of a fine dining restaurant. The offer was presented to Alara with the gravity of a state secret. The Sheikh's delegation required a temporary cultural liaison for the remainder of their 2-week stay in New York. The duties were vague, the pay was astronomical. It was enough to cover her next 3 semesters at Columbia. Alara knew it was not about her skills. It was about her silence. She had witnessed a moment of profound weakness, and this was the price of her discretion. She accepted. She needed the money for her tuition, for the rent on the small apartment in Queens she shared with her mother. She told herself it was just a strange, lucrative temp job. 2 weeks, and she would be gone. She was given a small, sterile office in the hotel suite that occupied an entire floor. Her job, she was told, was to be on call. For what no one specified. She spent the first day organizing press clippings, a task so simple it was insulting. But what Khalid did not realize was that he had not hired a temporary assistant. He had installed an observer in his own camp. And Alara was a very, very good observer. Her first surprise for him came on the 3rd day. He was in a video conference with his team in Riyadh, hammering out the details of a new energy consortium. The official interpreter, a man with 3 decades of experience, was translating the rapid-fire Arabic. Khalid was about to agree to a timeline when Alara, sitting in the back of the room as instructed, noticed a subtle shift in the Arabic verb form. The interpreter had translated "we will consider" as "we agree." It was a tiny error, the difference between a possibility and a promise, but in this world, that difference was worth billions. She scribbled a note on a small piece of paper from her notepad. She did not stand, did not speak. She caught Omar's eye and gave a slight nod toward the note. He retrieved it. The note said only, "Interpreter error. Yander versus Uafik. The meaning is consideration, not agreement." Omar's eyes widened. He slid the note across the table to Khalid. The sheik glanced down, his expression unchanging. He did not look at Alara. He simply raised a hand, cutting off his own executive. "Let me clarify," he said smoothly into the microphone. "We will consider the Q4 deadline. We do not agree to it at this time." The crisis was averted before it had even begun. No one in Riyadh knew a thing. But Khalid knew, and he knew who had saved him. What none of his staff knew was that Khalid was a man who tested everyone. He expected performance, loyalty bought and paid for. He decided to test her. That evening, a series of boxes arrived at her small office. They were from the city's most expensive boutiques: designer dresses, a leather briefcase that cost more than her car, a delicate diamond necklace. It was a gesture of gratitude, but it was also a leash, a down payment on her allegiance. The next morning, the boxes were returned to his suite, delivered by a hotel porter. Inside, on top of the tissue paper, was a simple, handwritten note on hotel stationery. "Thank you for the kind gesture. The generous salary is more than sufficient. Sincerely, Alara Evans." Khalid held the note. He had given gifts like this to dozens of people: consultants, politicians, assistants. Everyone took the gifts. The refusal was not an act of defiance, it was an act of classification. She was telling him she was not for sale. It was the most interesting thing that had happened to him all year. He began to create reasons to keep her close. He asked her to sit in on meetings, ostensibly to provide cultural context for his American counterparts. He had her proofread English language contracts, claiming his lawyers missed the nuances of the language. These were thin pretexts. His entire staff had been educated at Oxford or Harvard. Her presence was an anomaly, and everyone knew it. One night, he found her in the hotel's business center long after midnight. She was not working on his files. She was surrounded by her own textbooks, highlighter in hand, deep in a chapter on international maritime law. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. She was so focused, her brow furrowed in concentration, that she did not notice him. "Working late?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "My midterm is next week," she said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world to be studying for a college exam while on call for a billionaire. He walked closer, glancing at the title of her book. "Why this?" "Your deal with Henderson," she said, without thinking. "The shipping routes through the Strait of Hormuz. The insurance clauses are a mess. It has loopholes big enough to fly a jet through. I'm trying to understand why you'd sign it." Silence. No one on his payroll, no one in his family, would have dared to speak to him with such bluntness. They would have couched it in jargon, in deference, in fear. She said it like a math problem she was trying to solve. "And have you solved it?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "No," she admitted. "But I think you signed it knowing the loopholes were there. You wanted Henderson to think he had an advantage. You've left him an open door you intend to close at a time of your choosing." He did not confirm or deny it. He simply changed the subject. "Why so many languages? Why law?" For the first time, her professional composure wavered. A flicker of something personal crossed her face. "My father was a diplomat," she said. "We moved every 2 years. The languages, they were for survival. It's hard to be the new girl when you can't even ask where the library is." She looked down at her book. He loved this stuff. The architecture of agreements between nations. He thought it was the most important work in the world. "Where is he posted now?"
Khalid asked.
He's not, she said quietly. He passed away 2 years ago. An illness that came on too fast. He had a great mind, but not great insurance. And there it was. The backstory, delivered not as a plea for sympathy, but as a simple statement of fact. A world of intellectual curiosity and quiet integrity. Lost. A daughter left to fight her way through a world that valued contracts more than conversation. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Omar, who needed his signature on a document. He saw the two of them, alone in the quiet business center, and his expression tightened. Later that night, he requested a private word with the sheik. "Sir," Omar began, his tone careful. "The girl is remarkable, a great asset, but she is an 18-year-old American student. Her contract is for 2 weeks. The family in Riyadh will not understand her extended interest. The board will not understand. This is a complication we do not need." What Khalid did not tell Omar was that complication was the most interesting word he had heard all week. He was a man who managed empires. Complications were simply challenges to be solved. The next afternoon, during a break in a long series of negotiations, he saw her across the vast hotel lobby. She was not on her phone, not networking. She was sitting in an armchair by a tall window, reading a worn paperback. Sunlight streamed in, catching the dust motes dancing in the air around her. It was not a textbook. He could see from the cover it was poetry. She looked up, as if sensing his gaze, and her eyes met his. He was 100 feet away, a world away, but the connection was immediate. He did not look away. He held her gaze, and in that long, silent moment, something shifted. The professional distance between them collapsed. She was the one who broke contact first, looking down at the page of her book, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. He had seen past her composure, and she knew it. The blizzard arrived without ceremony. One moment, the sky was a flat, gray sheet. The next, the world outside the penthouse windows had dissolved into a churning vortex of white. New York City, a metropolis that prided itself on never stopping, ground to a halt. Airports closed. Roads became impassable. Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil, a man who could divert rivers and reroute global supply chains, was stranded. His private jet sat useless on a frozen tarmac. His delegation was confined to the gilded cage of the hotel suite. Most of the hotel staff had been sent home before the storm hit its peak. The remaining skeleton crew was overwhelmed. For the first time in his adult life, Khalid was not in control. He was simply waiting. And he hated waiting. Alara had been packing her single small bag, her 2-week contract set to end that evening. Now, she was as trapped as he was. She watched him pace the length of the main salon, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp and demanding as he spoke to pilots, to meteorologists, to city officials. He was a king without a kingdom, issuing commands that nature refused to obey. Hours later, the inevitable happened. A transformer blew somewhere in the storm-lashed city. The lights flickered and died. Emergency generators kicked in, casting the suite in a sterile, humming half-light, but the illusion of civilization had been breached. The silence that followed was profound. Khalid found Alara in the suite's library. The room was dark, save for the dozen or so candles she was calmly lighting and placing on mantelpieces and tables. The soft, flickering light pushed back the shadows, making the cavernous room feel intimate, warm. "What are you doing?" he snapped, his frustration finally boiling over. "There are emergency lights." She looked up at him, her expression unruffled. "Yes," she said, "but this is better. It feels warmer." The simplicity of her answer disarmed him. He stopped pacing. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. He looked at the dancing flames, at the way they made the polished wood of the bookshelves glow. She was right. It was better. "I hate this," he admitted, the words escaping before he could stop them. "The waiting. The not knowing. It reminds me of," he trailed off, annoyed at his own vulnerability. Alara did not offer platitudes. She looked at him with that unnervingly direct gaze of hers and spoke the truth. It reminds you of not being in control, she said. It was not an accusation, but a diagnosis. You're not used to it. Most people live their whole lives like this. No one had ever said anything like that to him. His world was populated by people who reinforced his power, who insulated him from the ordinary anxieties of life. Her words were not disrespectful. They were simply true. And in the strange, candlelit intimacy of the storm, the truth felt like a lifeline. He sank into a leather armchair near the fireplace, which she had also managed to light. "My brother," he said, the name tasting foreign on his tongue. He had not spoken it in years. "My older brother, Faisal. He was the one who was supposed to take over. He was brilliant, charismatic. But he was a dreamer, a poet." He stared into the fire, seeing a past he had buried under a mountain of ambition. He fell in love. A woman from a rival family. An impossible match. Our father forbade it. So Faisal walked away. From the business, from the family, from his name. He chose her. He abdicated everything for a quiet life in a small house by the sea. The bitterness in his voice was a raw, unhealed wound. The family called it a weakness, a betrayal. I was 22. I had to step in. I had to be twice as ruthless, twice as disciplined, to erase the shame of his choice. I built this empire to be a fortress, to prove that I was nothing like him, that I would never choose weakness. He finally looked at her, his eyes dark with a pain he rarely acknowledged. "That is why I cannot stand waiting. It is the one thing I cannot command. It feels like his weakness, like poetry, like love." Alara listened, her hands clasped in her lap. The story resonated with a painful familiarity. When he finished, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. "My father was like your brother," she said, her voice soft. The confession hung in the air between them, not in the details but in the choice. He was a brilliant diplomat. He could have been an ambassador in London or Paris. He could have been wealthy, but he chose the difficult postings, places where he thought he could do some small good. He chose meaning over money, every time. She looked at Khalid, and for the first time, he saw the depth of her own loss. When he got sick, he didn't have the fortune to pay for the best care. He had a life rich in everything but money. For a long time, I was angry at him for that choice. But I came to realize, he didn't abdicate anything. He chose his own kingdom. It just wasn't one you could measure on a balance sheet. Her wound was answering his. She was offering him a different interpretation of the story he had told himself for 2 decades. Not weakness, but a different kind of strength. The space between their chairs seemed to shrink. The candlelight softened the hard lines of his face, revealing the younger man who had been forced to become a king. He leaned forward, drawn by an impulse he did not try to name. He reached out, his fingers tracing the air just inches from her face, as if to tuck away a strand of hair that had fallen across her cheek. The air crackled. It was a moment of pure, unspoken possibility. He stopped. His hand froze, then retreated. The mask of control slammed back into place. "The generators will be fully operational soon," he said, his voice once again formal, distant. He stood abruptly and left the library, leaving her alone in the flickering light. The storm broke the next morning. By noon, the airports were set to reopen. The frantic energy of departure preparations filled the suite. Alara packed her bag again, a sense of finality settling over her. The interlude was over. She would go back to her classes, to her life. Just before they were scheduled to leave for the airport, Khalid called a final meeting with his senior advisors. Omar asked Alara to attend, to take the minutes. She sat at the corner of the large table, her notepad open, ready to become invisible again. Khalid was all business. He issued a series of rapid-fire instructions for the London office, the Tokyo branch. Then he paused. "One final matter," he said, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Alara. "We are launching a new philanthropic initiative, the Al Jamil International Foundation for Diplomatic Studies. It will provide full scholarships for exceptional students of linguistics and international relations. Its initial endowment will be $50 million. A murmur of surprise went through the advisors. This was new to all of them. The foundation will require a director to oversee the selection committee, Khalid continued, his voice even. Someone with a unique understanding of both the academic requirements and the real-world application of these skills. The position will be based here, in New York. He looked directly at Alara. The entire room followed his gaze. Miss Evans will be heading the project. Omar arranged the contracts and the office space. Her salary will be commensurate with the position. It was not a question. It was a pronouncement. It was not a romantic gesture, but a professional one. He was not offering her a place at his side. He was building her a platform of her own, placing his name, his reputation, and his money behind her talent. It was a gesture of belief more profound than any whispered sweet nothing in a candlelit room. The news of an 18-year-old American student being appointed to run a $50 million foundation traveled from New York to Riyadh at the speed of outrage. Weeks after the blizzard, as Alara was wading through the legalities of establishing the nonprofit, Sheikh Khalid's uncle arrived. Abdullah Al-Jamil was the family's anchor to the old ways, a man whose quiet disapproval carried the weight of a royal decree. He did not summon her to the gleaming new office Khalid had secured for her. He requested her presence at a private, wood-paneled club in Midtown, a place that smelled of old money and exclusion. Khalid was in Tokyo. A detail Alara was certain was not a coincidence. Abdullah was impeccably polite.
He poured her tea.
He spoke of his nephew's great vision, of the family's commitment to tradition. And then he came to the point. "My nephew is a man of great passion," he said, his eyes kind but his words forged from steel. "But he is young. He can be impressionable. Our family has obligations. Alliances that are forged through generations, often through marriage. These things require a certain focus." He reached into his jacket and produced a long, cream-colored envelope. He slid it across the polished table. It was not sealed. Inside, she could see the corner of a check. "A gift," Abdullah said smoothly. "A token of our family's deep gratitude for your temporary assistance. It is enough for you to complete your studies without distraction, to provide for your mother. A fresh start. It is time for you to return to your life." Khalid must return to his. The threat was unspoken but absolute. Take the money and disappear, or become an obstacle that the Al-Jamil family would be forced to remove. Alara looked at the check. The number of zeros was dizzying. It was a solution to every practical problem in her life. It was security. It was freedom. It was also a cage. She thought of her father, who chose meaning over money. She thought of Khalid, who was trapped by the belief that the two were mutually exclusive. She placed her hands flat on the table and met the old man's gaze. Then, she gently slid the envelope back across the table. "Your nephew hired me to do a job, sir," she said, her voice steady and clear. "My father taught me that when you give your word, you keep it. I will not be resigning." Abdullah's eyes narrowed. He had expected tears or a negotiation. He had not expected this quiet, unshakable resolve. Before he could respond, Alara took out her phone. She opened a translation application, selected Arabic, and spoke into it, her tone formal and respectful. The phone's synthesized voice filled the silence. "However, I understand your concerns about appearances. Perhaps you would like to sit on the Foundation's advisory board? Your wisdom and experience would be a great asset in guiding our mission." She had not just defied him. She had outmaneuvered him, using the very language of respect and tradition he revered. She had turned his attempt at dismissal into an invitation, offering him a public role that would allow him to save face while cementing her own authority. For the second time in a month, and Al-Jamil was left utterly speechless by Alara Evans. Khalid received the call from his uncle in his Tokyo hotel suite. He listened to the entire, furious account without saying a word. When Abdullah finished, Khalid did not argue. He simply said, "Thank you for letting me know," and ended the call. He canceled the rest of his meetings and boarded his plane. But he did not fly to New York. He flew to Riyadh. He called a full council of the family elders. The meeting lasted for 6 hours behind closed doors. The details of what was said would become the stuff of family legend, but the outcome was swift and public. The following morning, the Al Jamil corporate press agency issued a global statement. It announced the formal launch of the Al Jamil International Foundation for Diplomatic Studies. The statement included the full list of the board of directors. At the top of the list, designated as chairwoman, was Ms. Ilara Evans. Listed directly beneath her name, as a board member, was Sheikh Abdullah Al Jamil. It was a checkmate. Khalid had not only defended her, he had publicly and irreversibly enshrined her authority, forcing his own family to acknowledge it. He had chosen her, not in a whisper, but in a press release. A few days later, Omar found Ilara in her new office. It had a sweeping view of Central Park. She was standing by the window, looking small against the vastness of the city, a file held forgotten in her hand. She looked utterly overwhelmed. Omar, the same man who had once warned Khalid that she was a complication, quietly placed a cup of jasmine tea on her desk. "I advised him against this," Omar said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I told him you were a risk." He paused, looking out the window with her. "I was wrong. He has not done this for a woman. He has done this for himself. You make him more of who he was meant to be. Before he decided steel was the only thing of value. It was the simple, unvarnished truth, the kind of truth that changes everything." Khalid returned to New York a week later. He did not send a car. He did not summon her. He walked into the restaurant on the 42nd floor where it had all begun. It was a Tuesday night, and the room was quiet. She was not working. She was sitting at a small table near the back with her former manager, sharing a simple meal to celebrate her new life. He walked through the room, the other patrons falling silent as they recognized him. He stopped at her table. Her manager looked up, his eyes wide. Ilara looked up, her heart giving a painful lurch. Khalid did not say her name. He did not smile. He simply looked at her, and then at the table. He reached down and picked up an empty water glass. He held it up. "Still?" he asked, his voice low, private, and laced with a humor that belonged only to the two of them, or sparkling. It turns out the difference between still and sparkling was everything, and for the first time in his life, Sheikh Khalid Al Jamil was finally choosing something that fizzed.